If you were to find out a year from now that Donald Trump was diagnosed with dementia, how would you tell? How would his behavior be any different from what we've seen over the past several weeks, including today and this past weekend when he delivered a vulgar, foul-mouthed attack on Vice President Kamala Harris, had a bizarro photo op at a closed McDonald's where he falsely accused Harris of lying about working there, and accused 60 Minutes of deceitful editing of its recent interview with Harris, vowing to subpoena the show's records. CBS adamantly rejects Trump's claims and also noted that it was Trump who pulled out of his interview with 60 Minutes and the vice president who showed up to participate.
I wasn't a Washington person. I was a New York person. So when I went to Washington, all of a sudden I'm standing in the White House opposite the Lincoln.
And in an effort to woo voters in the city that he recently insulted, Trump stumped in Detroit, where technical difficulties forced him to wander around aimlessly around the stage for nearly 20 minutes after his mic cut out, rendering him speechless for once. He then kicked off a rally with a weird, very detailed story about Arnold Palmer, which referenced the late legendary golfer's genitalia.
I'm going to tell him the real story of Arnold. But Arnold Palmer was all man, and I say that in all due respect to women, and I love women. But this is a guy that was all man. This man was strong and tough. And I refuse to say it, but when he took showers with the other pros, they came out of there, they said, oh my God, that's unbelievable.
Ew. Now, for the record, Arnold Palmer's daughter said in 2018 that her father, who died in September 2016, made noises of disgust when Trump appeared on the television. She also said her father, who was a conservative and friendly with Dwight D. Eisenhower, wanted no part of Trump's politics. So this is where we are in American politics, with just 15 days to go before one of the most consequential elections in modern U.S. history. And as much as you might want to laugh at Trump, it's not funny. There is nothing particularly humorous about what he wants to do. His Hitler talking points about the enemy from within are very real. Despite the protestations of Speaker Mike Johnson and other cronies that Trump was just talking about the brown boogeyman, Trump himself doubled down on the enemy from within being fellow Americans. And he said January 6th was, quote, actually a beautiful thing and a day of love. And then you have his running mate, J.D. Vance, playing the rhetoric down. Because what's a Trump vice president other than a MAGA doormat making excuses about the boss? Vance and others deflect the horror of what Trump says by claiming those of us who warn about him just have Trump derangement syndrome. And there's nothing to fear since he didn't go after his enemies during his first term. Except that's simply untrue. It wasn't that long ago when all of this was taking place. The Washington Post broke down what Trump did while in power. He pressed then Attorney General Jefferson Beauregard Sessions to order an investigation of Hillary Clinton. He scolded the Justice Department for failing to investigate Clinton. He demanded investigations of Barack Obama over the phony Spygate claims. He told the White House counsel's office that he wanted to order the Justice Department to investigate Hillary Clinton and former FBI Director James Comey. He threatened to prosecute Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger if he refused to help Trump find the necessary votes to win the state that he lost. And he pressed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to open an investigation, a fake investigation of Biden, who was planning to run for president, a.k.a. why he was impeached the first time. Add to that the fact that his Justice Department literally locked up Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, after he testified against him in Congress and to a grand jury and wrote an unflattering book. All of that happened when Trump was president. The difference now is that the normie Republicans and military generals who told Trump, no, you can't shoot protesters in the leg or declare war on Mexico or shut down CBS for not kissing your behind, those people are gone. Replaced by a legion of MAGA suck-ups and third-rate right-wing trolls who will do whatever Trump says. And the Supreme Court, transformed under MAGA, has emboldened him even further, granting Trump near total immunity, even if he commits crimes in office. A second Trump term will feature cabinet members like QAnon General Michael Flynn, who Trump has suggested will be back in a second administration and who said the gates of hell would be unleashed under Trump. And people like felon Steve Bannon and child separation vampire Stephen Miller. Which is why Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris is holding events across 3 states today with conservative Republican Liz Cheney with a key message about what's actually at stake.
Don't think that Congress can stop him. Yeah. People say, well, you know what, he can't really do the worst, because Congress will step in. All he has to do is what he's doing, is say, I won't fulfill our NATO treaty obligations, and NATO begins to unravel.
We have in our grasp the ability to determine the course of our country. Every election we've said this is the one. This is the one. This truly is the one.
Joining me now is David Jolly, MSNBC political analyst and former Republican congressman, and Christina Greer, associate professor of political science at Fordham University and author of the forthcoming book, How to Build a Democracy. Thank you both for being here. I do want to start with you first, David, because you were in Congress. When Liz Cheney said that, I thought it was chilling, because I think people who claim it's TDS to say that Donald Trump will do all these bad things because he didn't do it the first time. Number one, he did. He tried to do it, but he was stopped by the guardrails, the sort of normies in government, the so-called deep state, the regular people in government, and even in his cabinet, who said, even if they were right-wingers, you cannot do that. They wouldn't be there. What do you make of Liz Cheney's warning that Congress wouldn't stop him?
The problem we face as a nation is bigger than Donald Trump, the candidate, and the presidency and the president. It is Trumpism that has infected the Republican Party. And so it gives you enablers like J.D. Vance, but also Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and go down the list of people, Republicans who know better, but have decided that they are okay with Donald Trump really shredding the Constitution if it means Republicans have a shot at winning and serving in power. The problem is there's also no payback for them. Donald Trump is fiercely unloyal, but they also have no policies they're actually advancing. So it's kind of power for power's sake, and it's minority power. This is a man who's never won the popular vote, and this year will likely get 48% of the vote. But it remains a real threat. And I still, look, my wishful thinking, Joy, and I realize I'm naive in thinking this may happen, is when you mention the generals who worked for him, the Joint Chiefs who worked for him, if they really think that he is dangerous to the nation, I think their honor is now on the line as well, to have some type of press event that breaks the news cycle and at least reaches medium and low information voters and says, we believe this man truly is a danger. Not telling it to Bob Woodward. Hold a press conference. Do something very public before the election that expresses the danger they see in Donald Trump as a leader, because the danger is real.
Yeah, whether George W. Bush, speaking of that, former president who hasn't said much either, he hasn't said anything yet. And this is how, Christina, this is how people are feeling. Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, she addressed today the extreme anxiety people are feeling out there, and I thought did it in a way that's one of her best rhetorical moments, I think, since I've been covering her as a politician. Take a listen.
There's an incredible strength when our democracy is intact. An incredible strength in what it does to protect the freedoms and rights of its people. Oh, there's great strength in that. And it is very fragile. It is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it. And so that's the moment we're in. And I say do not despair, because in a democracy, as long as we can keep it in our democracy, the people, every individual has the power to make a decision about what this will be. And so let's not feel powerless. Let's not let and I get it, overwhelming nature of this all make us feel powerless, because then we have been defeated. And that's not our character as the American people.
And Christina, the reason people feel scared and powerless is this is what Donald Trump has said that he will do with power. He wants to jail top officials, invokes military tribunals. He wants to put to death people like Mark Milley. He floats the idea of executing Chairman Milley. He wants to take CBS's broadcast license because they did an interview with Kamala Harris that wasn't trashing her. He wants to give police, quote, one violent day to stop crime. So he wants to go Maduro on American citizens and unleash the police against, and we know what those people will look like, Christina. That's why people are afraid. But talk about that fear, but also Vice President Harris's response.
Oh, Joy, you know, so many people come up to me and they just literally stare me in the eyes and they say, what is going to happen? And I have to remind them I'm a political scientist, not a political psychic. And I echo what the vice president has said, which is our democracy is a series of daily decisions that we must make collectively as a people. And I think a lot of Democrats sort of had questions asked and questions answered, and we put our democracy in a frame, and we looked at it and we patted ourselves on the back and said, we've accomplished it. But we have to fight for it, because as we've seen, Republicans have been fighting to dismantle a lot of these hard-fought wins that we've had. Beyond Roe v. Wade, I'm talking about the voting rights protections. I'm talking about environmental protections. The list goes on and on. And so hopefully there are enough people who are doing the hard work. So beyond just being scared, what always helps me when I'm overwhelmed by something is to do the thing. So if you're having anxiety about writing, you know this, Joy, you have a best-selling book, it's to just get writing. So I tell people now, if they're nervous about November 5th, then actually door knock if you're in a swing state. You know, get on those robocalls and call people. Talk to your relatives. There are a lot of people who are still on the fence because of misogyny, because of racism, just because of these undecided factors that they can't seem to put their hand on, but they can't also seem to vote for a woman. Remind those people the longitudinal importance of getting Kamala Harris into office. And I know no candidate is perfect. No president has ever been perfect. But in this particular election, domestically and internationally, as you laid out so eloquently, we cannot have someone who is cognitively impaired and also has laid out his criminal intents for the American people. We have to understand the stakes of this election.